Okay, so last week we talked about Isaiah. How uplifting was the book of Isaiah for the most part?
The basis of the gospel in a lot of ways.
There are messianic parts in there that redeem the rest of it. Most of the book is doom and destruction on Babylon, Edom, Israel, Judah, and other nations. But fortunately, there's Isaiah 53 and other places where it talks about there's going to come a time when the burden will be lifted. Your sins, though they be as scarlet, they'll be as white as snow. And so there's definitely a wonderful hope when the Messiah comes. And that's exactly why so much quoting is done in the New Testament of the book of Isaiah. And so it was a little bit discouraging reading through so much of the parts where it just talks about, but what I'm doing it just so we'll get the idea that not following God has consequences, and they can be very dire consequences. And if Isaiah was doom and destruction, Jeremiah is doom and destruction on steroids, because it's even worse. And so today we'll look at Jeremiah and the other book that he wrote, Lamentations. And just from the name of the book, Lamentations, you can kind of guess that's not going to be real uplifting either. But start with, remember this material as it's written is from somebody else, but he does a pretty good job. And so rather than try to put it all in my own words, I'm reading from his description of these prophets. And I may have changed a few things along the way, but not much. Anyway, Jeremiah's ministry extended from 626 to 586 BC. Now, one of those dates should be really familiar to you. Anybody want to offer up a suggestion? Which one of those two dates? Actually, I don't know if I can find it real quick, but let's look at this for a second. Nope, got to get the red pointer. Okay, right here you see a date, 586, Babylonian captivity. It started in 606 when the king and some of the cream of the crop were taken off to Babylon. And then in 597, there was another rebellion. More of them were taken away to Babylon. 586, Nebuchadnezzar had it, and he came and totally destroyed Jerusalem, Judea, took everybody, all the rest of the people to captive, except for just the dregs of society that a few of them remained in Jerusalem. And so 586 is a really important date, because just like 722 BC is a really important one, because that's the Assyrian captivity. 586 is when the Babylonian captivity was complete. And then 536 is when they came back out of captivity. And this is where it can get a little bit confusing, because you always want to remember 586, because this is when it really was complete. But how long was the Babylonian captivity? 70 years. And you go back from 536, you add 70 years to that. Do you get 586? No, you get 606. And so the 70 years started from the time the first captives were taken into Babylon, not when the last captives were taken into Babylon. So some of these people from 606 to 586 is 20 years. Some of them only stayed 50 years.
So if I'm figuring this right, Jeremiah only lived to be 40 years old.
No, this was the time that he prophesied.
Okay.
He prophesied during these years. So he was an old man when he died. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But anyway, so the 70 years of captivity goes from 606. That's why we put all three of these dates in, because the captivity started and then more were added, taken off, and then finally everybody was taken off in 586. But so it goes from 606 to 536 was what the 70 years was. And it was preceding this 586, and several kings before 586 is when he prophesied. And so I wonder if I don't know if there's a way to get back to where I was really easily, but anyway, 626 BC. So it was after the Assyrian captivity, but before and right up to the time of the complete Babylonian captivity is when Jeremiah, that was his time of prophesying. And his whole purpose was to tell the people of Judah, you're out of here. Might as well give it up because you're going. Don't even bother praying to God or any of that stuff. It's already cast in stone. You're going, just get ready. And somehow the people didn't like that message. And so you can kind of guess maybe Jeremiah wasn't super popular. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But anyway, he was a prophet of doom who, upon God's command, never married. So he didn't ever get married, and that was because God says, don't get married. Why do you think he's told him not to get married? Did Paul say something about that? 1 Corinthians 7. If you're unmarried, stay that way. Because of what? Because of the present distress. And if they had a present distress then, which they definitely did, same thing was just about to happen to Jerusalem in Paul's day, as was about to happen in Jeremiah's day. And so Jeremiah is told, don't get married. Things are going to be bad. And they're not going to be easy on you. And therefore, they wouldn't be easier on your wife. So don't get married. His words were written down, not by himself, but by his secretary, Baruch. And they are characterized by self-analysis and self-criticism. So in quite a bit of it, he talks about his own self, but through another writer. But anyway, his denunciatory tirades against his enemies, seeking redress, and his long complaints express the kind of life he lived. And well, as you can tell, I didn't write that. I would have worded it a little bit different. But anyway, basically, he goes on these tirades against his enemies, and he asks God, come on, pour fire from heaven down or whatever, give me some relief here. That just gives you an idea of the kind of life he had to live because of the message that he was preaching. It says that he says then he justly termed is justly termed the weeping prophet. And part of that is because of the book of Lamentations, lamenting things. And so he's called the weeping prophet, by scholars and other people. He prophesied in Judah during the troubled reigns of Josiah. If you remember, Josiah began to be king when he was real young, and he did pretty good at the beginning, but then he trailed off. And it was during his time that Jeremiah was prophesying, trying to give him some advice, which he later quit taking. Anyway, so he prophesied during Josiah's reign, and Josiah being a kindred spirit who died fighting the Egyptians. He also prophesied during the time of Jehoiakim, who persecuted him and ruled during the siege of Jerusalem. So it was Jehoiakim who ruled during the siege of Jerusalem in 605, the very first one. And it was Jehoiakim that got taken off to Babylon along with Daniel and the educated ones, the cream of the crop. And then he also, okay, well, I need to finish this sentence. It was Jehoiakim who persecuted and ruled during the siege of Jerusalem in 605 by Nebuchadnezzar after the defeat of the Egyptians at the Battle of Carchemish. Battle of Carchemish is a real famous one that took place. The Babylonians were heading to Egypt, and Egypt didn't want to wait till the Babylonians got there. So the Pharaoh Necho, went up, and they met each other at Carchemish, which is a little bit north of Israel, and a huge earth-shattering battle took place there, and the Egyptians lost, but Nebuchadnezzar didn't keep going after Egypt. And anyway, it was during this battle that Josiah thought he was trying to do the right thing, help the Egyptians against Babylon, because the prophets were saying Babylon was gonna take out Judah, and so he went to help Pharaoh Necho, but that wasn't a good idea. These alliances with other nations were never okay with God. And anyway, he died. He was killed, and so then the next king was Jehoiachin, and then Zedekiah. Neither one of them were any good, and they didn't like Jeremiah, and that was the time period between 597 and 686. And then he ended up fleeing to Egypt at the end of his life. When everybody was taken captive, he left. God allowed him to go the other direction. He fled to Egypt. But next sentence, according to tradition that is preserved in extra biblical sources, he was stoned to death by his exasperated fellow countrymen in Egypt. So, not a happy story. His own people stoned him to death because he preached the message they didn't want to hear. We're going to talk about that part there in just a minute. Well, no, we're not. We're going to talk. I'm going to mention it in my lesson. I'll just say it here because it's germane. Know anybody else that was stoned and left for dead? Stephen, and anybody else? The Apostle Paul in Lystra, he was stoned. They thought they stoned him to death, but he was dead. God raised him up. So if what happened to these people then, they were destroyed because of the way they treated the prophets, and then how did the people treat the prophets in the New Testament times? Any better? No better. Should we be surprised what happened to Jerusalem in 70 AD? Shouldn't be surprised at all. And it shouldn't surprise us in the least that the very last message that Jesus gave, the revelation of Jesus Christ, would talk about, and it says in the first chapter, it's the avenging of the apostles and the prophets, God getting vengeance because of what they had done. He was getting vengeance for that in this destruction in 586. Why would the book of Revelation be talking about Rome, which no place in the Old Testament ever talks about Rome other than in Daniel's prophecy that in the days of these kings, the Messiah would be raised up and everything. So much is said about Israel and Jerusalem. It makes so much more sense to understand the book of Revelation that he's talking about, look, I'm coming after you guys, and it's because of what you have done to every single prophet. Jesus even says it in his own ministry. Which of the prophets have you not persecuted? Beginning with Abel all the way through to Zechariah. You've persecuted them all. Now your house is left to you desolate. God's gone. We'll talk about that. We have to talk about Matthew 24 before we talk about Revelation also. So we got a lot of stuff coming along, but this totally sets the stage for that. And that's why we're reading all this stuff. Okay, so Jeremiah denounced the sins of his countrymen and prophesied the judgment and destruction of Judah. Israel was already gone. So now he's prophesying that Judah is going to be destroyed, Judah to come, as well as the wrath to fall on Babylon, Moab, the Philistines, and others. So just like Isaiah had prophesied bad stuff to happen to these other nations, Jeremiah does it too, but he's emphasizing Judah the most. He emphasized the value of repentance, the importance of individual responsibility, and the restoration and renewal that would later follow. The oracles in the book are not arranged in chronological order. So if you read the book of Jeremiah, it's not necessarily in chronological order. So you got to keep that in mind when you're studying it. But it's interesting that he emphasizes the importance of individual responsibility. It starts with me, starts with you. The nation's not going to change until individuals collectively change, then the nation will change. It doesn't go the other direction. So anyway, the next thing this guy says, he talks about Jeremiah's call. And now we're getting into quotes from the book of Jeremiah itself. Notice right here it says 1:4 and then 16:1. He's quoting and he's telling you where these quotes come from at the end of each little quote. So as far as Jeremiah's call, God says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I set you apart. I appointed you as prophet to the nations. You must not marry and have sons or daughters in this place." So that's God calling Jeremiah, and he just takes a few, this guy that is writing this takes a few excerpts. Notice the ellipses, the three dots means he's just taking the meat of it and to try to get the main ideas across rather than quoting the entire scriptures. If you go through it yourself, you can see what is left out. But this tells you in essence about his call by God. And then he wants to talk about the sins of the people, quoting Isaiah or quoting Jeremiah. "Your wickedness will punish you. Your backsliding will rebuke you," from chapter 2:19. "But you have lived as a prostitute with many lovers." Book of Revelation have any prostitute in it? Yeah. And so if the book of Revelation is anything like the book of Jeremiah, maybe when he talks about a prostitute, he's talking about an unfaithful, that's what a prostitute is, an unfaithful woman. Maybe he's talking about the nation, not an actual woman. Not just maybe, that's exactly what's happening. Jesus is taking passages that they were totally familiar with in the Old Testament to show this is exactly the same as you people are right now. And he's writing in apocalyptic language because he's exiled on the island of Patmos. These people, the Romans have no clue what he's writing about. I mean, anybody picks up the book of Revelation, reads through, what are they going to say? What is this? This is crazy. Well, he wrote it that way for a purpose, so the message could get out, but it's coded with phrases from the Old Testament that the people that needed to hear it, needed to get this message, would understand exactly what he's talking about. And so anyway, there's so many phrases in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, the other prophets that are borrowed or that are incorporated in the book of Revelation. You'll never understand the book of Revelation if you don't know how they're used in the Old Testament, because that's where they come from. So anyway, he says, I'm talking about Judah. You have lived as a prostitute with many lovers. What are the lovers? Idols, foreign countries where they try to make these alliances with. They are well-fed, lusty stallions, each neighing for another man's wife. Has this house, which was the temple he's talking about, which bears my name, this house that bears my name, become a den of robbers to you? And so he's talking about the unfaithfulness of the people of Judah. And you can see they had made the temple a den of thieves. Any reference to a den of thieves in the New Testament? Yes. So it's so important to know the Old Testament so that these things in the New Testament can really mean something to you. Anyway, can the Ethiopian change his skin? What color of skin do the Ethiopians have? Yeah, it's a black race, and that's why he used them. He's not saying anything bad about being that color, but can you change it? No, not any more than a person can decide they want to be a girl if they're a man, or want to be a boy if they're a girl. You can. That's how you're born. You can't change that. I mean, you can cut yourself up and get these operations stuff. A boy is still a boy and a girl is still a girl. A black person is still black and a white person is still white, whatever. You can't change those things. He says, can the Ethiopian change his skin or the leopard his spots? Neither can you do good who are accustomed to evil. It's so ingrained that it's like a person's skin. You can't change it. And you cannot change it. And that's why I'm telling you, you might as well give up and be ready to go into captivity, because that's what's happening. This is what's going to happen. I will scatter you like chaff driven by the desert wind. Cursed is the one who trusts in man, who depends on flesh for his strength. But blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord. That's why God told the people, you can't have chariots. I want you to trust me, not those chariots. The chariots were like the tanks of the modern age. And he says, you don't need that. You got me. Leave those things out. And here he's talking about depending on the flesh for their own strength. But he says, blessed is the man who trusts the Lord. He will be like a tree planted by the water. We have a song that we sing, just like a tree planted by the water. I will not be moved. Anyway, that's where that comes from. This person that's like a tree planted by the water does not fear when the heat comes, because he's right there. Being from Arizona, I know a little bit about when the heat comes, and they have these, I wish I could think of the name of it. Places where the river runs along. There'll be a bunch of cottonwood trees and green stuff right near the river. That happens in Missouri too, now that I think of it. Or not Missouri, but up in northeast Montana where we lived. Barrenness can be everywhere. Rolling hills full of wheat, and that's all. But along the river, they have a little first flood plain and then a second one. But in that first flood plain, there's just tons of growth. They get their water from the river, but you go another 150 yards and it's nothing can live unless it's watered by something else. And so anyway, you don't have to worry if your roots are right next to the water. He says, like clay in the hand of a potter, so are you in my hand. He says, I can do whatever I want with you because I'm the potter, you're the clay. I can mold it and make it just whatever I want it to make. Then he said, well, I need to go back for a second. This is him talking about the sins of the people and their relationship to God. And God's telling them, I'm the boss. I'm in charge here. And if I say it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And if you people don't live like you should, it's not going to be good. And so then he talks more about the disaster ahead. From the north, that he's talking about Babylon, disaster will be poured out on all who love in the land. A lion has come out of his lair. A destroyer of nations has set out. The whole land will be ruined. I will destroy the daughter of Zion, which is Jerusalem, so beautiful and delicate. Teach your daughters how to wail. These nations will serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. So that's where the prophecy of 70 years comes from Jeremiah. And that's exactly how long the people were in captivity in Jeremiah or in Babylon. Now talking about Jeremiah's own suffering, he says about himself, "Oh, my anguish, I writhe in pain. Oh, the agony of my heart. Since my people are crushed, I am crushed." So he felt for the people, even though they weren't being very good to him. He felt for them. Since they're crushed, I'm crushed. I mourn and horror grips me. Is there no balm in Gilead? Isn't there some healing balm I can put on and make myself feel better? Oh, that my head were a spring of water and my eyes a fountain of tears. I would weep day and night for the slain of my people. That's the kind of man Jeremiah was. These same people that put his eye, or that stoned him to death, he cared for those folks, and they would never see it. Now he talks about his enemies. I had been like a gentle lamb led to the slaughter. I did not realize that they had plotted against me. Let me see your vengeance upon them, for you have committed my cause. King Jehoiakim cuts up Jeremiah's prophetic scroll. This is not the quote ends right here. Now the guy that wrote this is talking. King Jehoiakim cuts up Jeremiah's prophetic scroll. Jeremiah, Baruch is writing this scroll, and Jehoiakim doesn't like it. He just cuts it up in pieces. And then Zedekiah's men imprison him in a cistern because he counsels surrender to Babylon. He's saying, give it up, folks, give it up. You're going, might as well not even fight it. And Zedekiah doesn't like that. And coincidentally or not, Zedekiah was the last king before total destruction came. But anyway, they put him in a cistern because he was saying you might as well surrender. But he also, just like Isaiah, had a messianic section or more, had messianic references. Jeremiah says this: the days are coming when I will raise up to David a righteous branch, a king who will reign wisely. In his days, Judah will be saved. When does it say Judah will be saved? In his days. That means when he's living on the earth. This is when it's not going to happen 2,000 years after Jesus came and went. It's going to happen in his days. And so what kind of a kingdom are we talking about? Spiritual kingdom. Jesus himself said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it was, my servants would fight, but it's not. How did it get changed to a physical one so that Jesus would come back and reign on a physical kingdom on this earth? That's going backwards, isn't it? It's totally absurd to think once Jesus is reigning as King of Kings and Lord of Lords in heaven, that he'd ever come back and anyone could think that would be a great thing, that he's ruling over the earth. He already does. It's just, anyway, we'll talk a lot about that in looking at the book of Revelation. But anyway, we've already talked a little bit about him complaining to the Lord, but in one place, chapter 20, verse 7, he says, "Oh Lord, you deceived me." Well, people can do a lot of stuff when they're stressed, and they say stuff that's not necessarily true. You remember Job? Did he say a couple things that probably weren't exactly accurate, and why he got dressed down really bad? And Job, when God says, "Were you there when I did this and that," and all that kind of stuff, sometimes we say stuff that's not necessarily true. Anyway, once they all went off into exile, he had this to say: build houses and settle down, marry and have sons and daughters, increase in number there, do not decrease. Also seek the peace and the prosperity of the city which I have carried you into exile. This is God speaking through Jeremiah. you might as well build a house because you're going to be here a while. You might as well get married, have sons and daughters because you're going to be here for a while. And so it's me that's carried you into this exile. And I've already told you how long it's going to be. It's going to be 70 years. Then he says, a voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and a great weeping. Rachel weeping for her children, that is the exiles, and refusing to be comforted because her children are no more. They don't exist anymore. Many of them were killed. They will return from the land of the enemy. So he says there's going to be a return, but many of them are dying. Now, this verse here, voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping, Rachel weeping for her children. That's referred to in the New Testament. Do you remember where?
When Jesus was an infant, heard Herod's command to kill all the newborn babies.
All right, that's exactly right. So that is an example of a dual fulfillment prophecy that happened with the destruction of Jerusalem then, and many people were killed. And so that when all these babies were killed, the same reaction happened. And so that's why that's quoted in the New Testament. Anyway, as far as the return from exile is concerned, I will restore them to the land I gave their forefathers. So he's going to restore them. They're going to get out of Babylon, and he tells them specifically where. To the land of their forefathers, the land of Israel. They're going back. You could call it home, but it's not going to be much like home when they get back there. And they're very dejected when they see it. So anyway, Jeremiah talks about a day of judgment. This is before the final end in 586. He's not talking about Judgment Day. He's talking about a day of judgment for them. How awful that day will be. None will be like it. I am with you and I will save you. Though I completely destroy all the nations among which I scatter you, I will not completely destroy you. And then he talks about the new covenant, Jeremiah 31. In those days, the people will no longer say the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children of teeth are set on edge. Instead, everyone will die for his own sin. Who, like he says, the son shall not bear the iniquity of the father shall not bear the iniquity of the son. I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and Judah. It will be like the covenant I made with their forefathers. I will put my law in their I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. So this covenant is going to be a spiritual one. It's going to be one that's here, not out here. And that's what this new covenant was going to be. And that is the time of the Messianic age. Okay, any questions on Jeremiah?
I think of something Jesus said to his disciples, that you will not be able to say, here is the kingdom, there is the kingdom. The kingdom is with you, in you.
Yeah.
In other words, that's something visible, physical, spiritual things in your hearts.
Yeah. And in essence, that's the way it should always have been. Was God happy when they said, give us a king, give us a king? What did he tell Samuel? They haven't rejected you. They rejected me. I should have been reigning in their hearts, not these other. It was a hard issue even back then. But he says this now, in the time to come, there's not going to be a king like you think there is. There will be a king, and he will reign over all, but his kingdom is not of this world, and it's going to be written in your minds and in your hearts. You're gonna serve me from the heart, and it's pretty interesting that this looking at these things coincide with the Sermon on the Mount, because it's all about heart and having your heart where it needs to be, and that's where true happiness is, and that's also where a relationship with God is. All right, we have a 10 minutes or so, so we'll look at Lamentations. Lamentations is a short book that was written by Jeremiah also. Tradition ascribes the book to Jeremiah, who was an eyewitness to the destruction of Jerusalem. It was probably written around 575, but not later than 516. In other words, we don't know exactly when it was written, but it mentions things that puts it between 575 and 516. It consists of 5 poetic laments. One of them is about Jerusalem. How like a widow is she, who once was great among the nations. The Lord has brought her grief because of her many sins. Jerusalem has sinned greatly and so has become unclean. The Lord has rejected his altar and abandoned his sanctuary. God has abandoned his sanctuary. Where was his sanctuary? On earth. Where was his sanctuary?
In the temple.
In the temple, and where specifically?
Most holy place.
The most holy place, right in front of the Ark of the Covenant with the angels with the wings.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was in the temple, the Lord's house. What did Jesus say in Matthew 23? Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. Saying exactly the same thing here. God has rejected his altar and abandoned his sanctuary. Jesus said God has done that again in Jerusalem in his own time. So I tried so many times to gather you together as chicks, as a hen gathers her chicks, and you wouldn't let me. Now God's gone. He has left the building, and we know what happens when God leaves. Bad stuff happens, and that's exactly what had happened in Jerusalem in 586. God has left the building. Her king and her princes are exiled amongst the nation. The law is no more. Everything was destroyed. Okay, then about the exile in the book of Lamentations, Jeremiah says this: Judah has gone into exile. She dwells among other nations. O daughter of Zion, that's Jerusalem is Zion. O daughter of Zion, your punishment will end. He will not prolong your exile. So you've gone into exile, but it's going to end. He won't prolong it. It's going to last a certain period of time. Now, concerning his own anguish, he says, my eyes fail from weeping. I am in torment within. My heart is poured out on the ground. I'm just totally ruined by all this that I see around me. I'm so sad for these people. Anyway, then as far as his own enemies, he said, they tried to end my life in a pit and threw stones at me. Remember, he was thrown into that cistern, and he says, this is what happened. They tried to kill me. They threw stones at me. This is while he was still alive. He wasn't alive anymore when they finally threw stones again and killed him. But anyway, you have seen, O Lord, the wrong done to me. Pay them back what they deserve. May your curse be on them. Pursue them in anger and destroy them from under the heavens of the Lord. So you might say he was a little bitter about the way he was treated, even though he loved those people. It's pretty hard when you're in a cistern and having people throw stones at you. It's pretty hard to have a lot of compassion for those people at the moment, even though Jesus had to do it or did it. Anyway, he says this about this is the last page here, about the suffering of the people. Now this is bad, so just be ready to close your ears if you have to. This is quoting from Jeremiah, though, not me. They say to their mothers, where is bread and wine? And they faint like wounded men as their lives ebb away in their mother's arms. Look, O Lord, and consider, whom have you ever treated like this? Should women eat their offspring, the children they have cared for? How the gold has lost its luster. Even jackals offer their breasts to nurse their young. But my people have become heartless like ostriches in the desert. The children beg for bread, but no one gives it to them. The punishment of my people is greater than that of Sodom. With their own hands, compassionate women have cooked their own children. Women have been ravished in Zion and virgins in the towns of Judah. This is describing how bad it got in Jerusalem before the final end came. People were so desperate to eat, they wouldn't feed their children. Instead, when the children died, they would cook them and eat them. That happened also, no surprise, that happened in 70 AD. When we get there, study Matthew 24, I'm going to read you a passage out of Josephus, which is just as hard to read as this one right here. So things were not good. And why was all this destruction coming upon them? Because they rejected God. They wouldn't let this benevolent God who wanted to rain down blessings on them, they wouldn't just give themselves over to him and let him be their king. They wanted to be like everybody else. There's a lesson in there somewhere. I think we all know what the lesson is. Anyway, that's when we come back from Arizona, we'll tackle Ezekiel and Daniel and then the minor prophets. Any questions or comments before we stop class? All right, thank you guys for your attention. Wish it could have been a little bit more uplifting, but got to hear the truth before you can understand the gospel. Hear the bad news, and then you appreciate the good news. This morning's scripture reading is from Matthew chapter 7 and also Luke chapter 6. Matthew says what Jesus was talking about, and Luke says the same things, but he also throws in a couple of verses to add just a little bit different thought to it. In Matthew chapter 7, he says, "Judge not, that you be not judged. For with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. Give," and Luke adds this in there. He says, "Give, and it will be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be put in your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you." So he's saying the same thing as Matthew quotes Jesus as saying, but he adds that business about good measure, pressed down, shaken together. We're going to be talking about that in the lesson, so I wanted to add that in for the scripture reading. I hope this doesn't get tiring, but I want to keep mentioning everything that goes on in the Sermon on the Mount every time, just so that we keep the whole entirety of the Sermon on the Mount in our heads. It begins with the Beatitudes, where Jesus says, "Blessed are the merciful, and blessed are the peacemakers," and all those. That word blessed means happy. That if you want to be happy, have a good heart, because a good heart is a happy heart. And that's what Jesus is saying in the Beatitudes. After he says the Beatitudes, he talks to the people about their responsibility as children of Israel, the responsibility to be the salt of the earth, be that preservative factor. Salt preserves, and salt also makes things taste good. And so as we live a righteous life, then we remember Abraham, was it Abraham said, oh yeah, with Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah, he says, if there's just 50 people, will you spare it? 50 righteous people would have spared the whole cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. He got it down to 10, but there weren't even 10. So we, if we're living according to God, we can help spare other folks around us from destruction, so to speak. But we also are to be the light, to light the way for other people, to show them how they ought to live, so that they can have a hope of eternal life as well. Anyway, then Jesus sets the stage of what he's going to say next, and says, I didn't come to destroy the law and the prophets. I came to fulfill them. And then he says this, he's asserting a new kind of authority by saying, you've heard it said, and he quotes the old law, and he says, but I say unto you. So he's giving the true and proper application of these following words. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery. Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. You shall not swear falsely, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. These were all things that they read about in the Old Testament, but he says, but I say unto you, and he tells what it really is all about. And then he talks about ostentatiousness, being showy in your prayers and in giving to people. And then last week we talked about where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And he also talked last week about worry. He says, why worry about what you're going to eat or what you're going to wear? God knows you need these things. He will provide those things. And so today now we go to another subject, and that is the subject of judging. Jesus says, judge not that you be not judged. For with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. And so we're going to talk about judge versus judge, because Jesus says something else in another place that seems contradictory. And there's a lot of arguing, or not arguing, but just misunderstanding about this term judging. 9 times out of 10, you start talking to somebody about anything and they'll say, don't judge me. Jesus said, don't judge. Judge not, that you be not judged. Well, Jesus said something else as well. First of all, he said what we just read, judge not that you be not judged, in Matthew 7:1. But in John, also chapter 7, but in John, verse 24, Jesus said, do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. So in one place he says, judge not. In another place he says, judge. Did Jesus contradict himself? No, he did not contradict himself. So how do we reconcile these two statements of Jesus? He said, one place he says, don't judge. One place he says, do judge. How do you reconcile that? Well, the way it's reconciled is the fact that there are two functions of a judge. We all understand it in our court system now. It's been true ever since there were judges. There's always been two functions. The first one is making a decision based on the facts of the case. That's what a trial is about, where the lawyers present the facts of the case, or at least they're supposed to, if they're honest. They present the facts of the case, and then either in a non-jury trial, the judge weighs the facts, the balance is there, weighs the facts, makes a decision about what these facts mean, or how you interpret those facts. In a jury case, the judge and the jury do the weighing of the evidence, and then that's one part of a whole trial. But once the judge has made a decision, if that decision is guilty, then the other part comes in, and that is to pronounce a sentence. I'm weighing the thing. I found that you're guilty of this. Now here's the sentence that you must serve because of that. And so there's two kinds of judging. One, just weighing the facts and making a decision of what those facts mean. And the second one is pronouncing the sentence. So going back to this other slide, judge not that you be not judged, that part is the kind of judging where you're pronouncing a sentence or condemning. That's what Jesus says, don't be doing that. You can't pronounce the sentence. You can't condemn a person. Back in Deuteronomy chapter 32, he says, God says, vengeance is mine. I will recompense. I'll pay back. You leave the vengeance to me. I'll pay that. That's God's job, to decide what the punishment must be and to administer that punishment It's not your job to judge that way. If you do judge people that way, if you condemn people, how's God going to do? He's going to judge you the same way that you're judging other folks. If you're being condemnatory, that's going to be what happens to you. And so he says, don't do that. Don't judge, because you'll be judged the same way that you judge others. The other statement where Jesus says, do not judge according to appearance, but judge righteous judgment. That's making a decision based on the facts. We are supposed to do that. You can't go through life without making judgments. You're going along, high school kids, even every day, people are coming on, hey, you want to do this? Let's go get some marijuana and smoke the marijuana or whatever. And you have to say, well, wait a minute. Where's the law fit in? Or let's go get drunk, or anything, whatever you want to do. Where does the law fit in? As a 17-year-old, I'm not even supposed to be drinking. So that would be going against, you have to make a judgment. Should I be doing this or should I not? And so that's the kind of judgment that he's talking about. When somebody is doing something and you judge that against God's word, and it's not matching up with God's word, then it's our duty to tell them, look, this activity is not going along with God like you should be doing. And when they say, don't judge me, then just show them this passage of John chapter 7, verse 24. And that's how that's reconciled. But here's where Luke adds this. He says, give and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be put into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it will be measured to you. Now, this is a reference to measuring out. It's a word picture that Jesus uses, just like in all our daily life. We have to measure things. And back then, in those days, when they went to the market to buy some flour, for example, or some grain, somebody would have a measuring thing, and I'll say quart because nobody knows what an ephah is, including myself. Give me a quart of that wheat there. And so they would have these jars, but you'd have to have a good measure. I don't know if you can see this, but some of these jars are a little bit bigger than the other ones, and they're not necessarily hold exactly the same amount. So if you have one, you call it your quart jar. When you're selling wheat to somebody, you got your quart jar. And what if it's just a little bit less than a quart? Over time, you're going to make some extra money, right? And so that's not a good measure. That's not being fair with the people that you're dealing with. It's kind of like it's not exactly the same, but when I go buy ice cream, that little square thing is not as big as it used to be, is it? It used to be you get a whole half gallon, and they changed it without ever telling anybody. They made it so many ounces or something instead of a half a gallon. Same thing is true with, I had another example in my mind a second ago, but we all know that everybody's size and stuff. Well, you go to buy a Big Mac, is it the same size that it was in 1967? Not even close. It looks the same, but it's just proportioned down. So you didn't notice it getting smaller and smaller. That's what's happening all around us. They're giving us less and charging us more for it. And it just seems not fair to me that's the case. But anyway, Jesus is, when you're dealing with people, he says, first of all, good measure, be fair about it. But not only just be fair, he says, good measure, pressed down. Now you can have that's an accurate, whatever it is, cup or 3/4 cup, whatever it is. But if you just scoop into a brown sugar, I guess that's brown sugar. You just scoop into brown sugar and shake it so it's level. do you get as much as if you press it down? And no, you don't. So he's saying, don't just use a good measure, but press down, because so you're giving the person the most for their money, so to speak. And he says, good measure, pressed down, shaken together. You all know what a bag of potato chips looks like when you grab it and you open it up. Where are the chips? Somewhere way down there. And there's a sign on there someplace that says some settling of contents may have occurred. And so we know that when you shake things down, they settle. So if you have bag of oatmeal or whatever, and you just take it and you pour it in, the bag's level full, what happens when you shake it? It settles down, and you can put another inch or two in there of oatmeal. That's what he's talking about. Not just using a good measure, but press it down, shake it down, and you get more. That's being generous, I guess, is the better a term for it. But then he says, and running over, not just shaken down, not just pressed down, but running over. That's how we should be dealing with other people in all of our dealings, not just giving out the bare minimum, but giving more. Because with the same measure that we use, if you're cheating people, it says that's how God's going to treat you. If you want to be treated bountifully, then treat other folks bountifully. And that's what this whole thing is talking about. Yeah, where Luke says, given it will be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, it'll be put into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, I thought that was going to be lightning or something. What I just say? Okay, so he said, with the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you. So you want to be dishonest or chintzy with other folks. God says, okay, I'll be chintzy with you. And that's the same thing that's going to happen. And so it's just, when you think about Jesus, is he being, you guys, if you do this? No, he's just saying, if you want to be blessed by God, bless other folks. Be right with your judgment. I mean, he's trying to be as reasonable and loving as he is. That's how he is. And by saying all these things, he's showing us the way. Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. Be like me. I mean, that's essentially the way it is. But then the story continues. He says, and why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me remove that speck from your eye, and look, a plank is in your own eye? How's that work? That's another word picture. I mean, we all have pictures, things in our mind about the speck and the plank. Everybody has their own idea in their head, but in this word picture, the speck really represents a small fault. A person has a small fault, something wrong that they're not doing right in life, and then somebody comes along with a big fault, trying to tell the other person what to do. Well, Jesus is saying, hypocrite, first remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck out of your brother's eye. You can't see clearly if you got a bunch of sins that you're supposed to be dealing with. How can you judge somebody else for a small little thing? And so he says, that's not the way you should act. And then Jesus takes a little interlude and gives a couple of more word pictures to illustrate a different subject. He says, do not give that what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet, and turn and tear you in pieces. Well, first of all, he says, do not give that which is holy to the dogs. What is that? What's he trying to get across? Well, in Leviticus chapter 7, he says, the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering for Thanksgiving shall be eaten the same day that it's offered. He shall not leave any of it until morning. And then he says, the remainder of the flesh, or the remainder of the flesh of the sacrifice, must be burned with fire. And so this is when they took an offering, this peace offering that he's talking about, they were given a portion of it to take home and eat. The priest could eat part of it. They would take part of it home and eat. Part of it would be burned up on the altar. But whatever you didn't eat that night, you had to burn it up because it was sacred. And so you didn't normally, just like, well, I guess modern people don't feed dogs with people food anymore. But when I was growing up, all the scraps went to the dogs. And back in Jesus's day, the same thing happened. Whatever, and if they had any leftovers, they would toss it to the dogs. Perfectly common, okay thing to do. But with these sacrifices, that which is holy, you don't be giving that to the dogs. Don't do anything with it other than burn it up because it's too sacred. And that's what Jesus is referring to when he says, do not give that which is holy to the dogs. Well, in this illustration, well, to apply it to us, we know that dogs do not have a mind for holy things. You can hand them a Bible and they'll chew on it. You know, they don't, God didn't give them that kind of mind. It's only human beings that can appreciate holy things. And so what he's talking about is people, some people do not have a mind for holy things. You talk to them about holy things and they don't even care. They don't care a thing about it. And so Jesus says to those people, don't share holy things with them. They can't appreciate it. Well, the fact is, people, to know whether people are having a mind for holy things or not, you have to make a judgment, don't you? Yeah, you do. And so that's the kind of judgment that Jesus says to do in John 7, to judge righteous judgment. You don't just look at somebody from afar and, yeah, that guy has got long hair, beard. Yeah, he's a dog, you know, don't share it with. No, a person needs to prove it to you, prove by their actions, give you something to judge on. That's good judgment. That's a good measure. You don't judge a man by appearances, but once they prove themselves by their actions that they don't have a mind for holy things, don't waste your time. And the other part of it is the pigs, nor cast your pearls before the swine. Got a handful of pearls, highly valuable. You throw them to the pigs. What are they going to do? They might try to eat one. And they bite it. What's going to happen? It hurts their tooth, and then they'll turn and tear you apart. I don't know how many of you ever dealt with pigs when you were young, but I spent summers with my grandpa and my uncles, and they all had pigs. And I'm not going to say it as loud as they did, but when they came down with the slop, you know, and the corn and stuff to feed the pigs, they would yell out, "Soo-wee!" You know, and what would happen? The pigs would come running. And if you didn't have something in your hand to give them when they got there, I don't know that they would have eaten you up or anything, but they might. No, I wasn't willing to ever chance that. But when they come, if you just poured out rocks, they wouldn't be happy. They want some food. That's why you call them, and that's what they're wanting is some food. And so Jesus says, you cast pearls before them, even though pearls are really valuable. They don't care. All they want is food. they'll turn and tear you apart. And believe me, pigs can do that. They got strong jaws and teeth that'll do it, especially those javelina pigs down in Arizona. They got razor sharp tusks and they can really rip you to shreds. But anyway, some people have contempt for what is truly valuable. These pigs, the swine, they don't care about how valuable a pearl is. Here, have this $3,000 string of pearls. They don't care. Some people are like that. What's truly valuable, they can't appreciate. First thing that comes to my mind is the big famous scientists, that think they're so high and mighty, and they know by science how long the earth has existed, or how long the universe and the Big Bang and all this kind of stuff. And you try to tell them about God. Oh man, evolution proves that there's no God, blah, blah. They'd have no, I mean, not only do they not have a desire for the truly valuable, they have contempt for it, and they'll turn and tear you apart. In fact, there's two examples that I want to look at. And well, first of all, both of these things were, I forgot to put this in, but both of these things, the casting your pearls before the swine and giving what's holy to the dogs, both of those require this kind of judging, making a decision based on the facts of the case. But you have to get the facts first. You don't just judge on appearances. You have to get the facts first. But what Jesus is saying is, don't waste your time and energy on people that have no appreciation of holy things, or those that have utter contempt for holy things. And a couple of examples in the Bible of people doing this. Jesus, many times the Pharisees came and asked him questions, trying to trap him and stuff, and he wouldn't answer them. He just plain wouldn't answer, or he would just answer with a question. You ask me this, you answer this, and then I'll answer you. So he wasn't wasting his time with those guys. He knew what they were up to. And then also in the book of Acts, when Paul was in Lystra preaching the gospel to the Jews, they didn't like hearing that. And so they took him outside and stoned him to death, and went back in thinking he was dead. And he got back up. I believe he was dead, and God raised him up. He got back on and shook the dust off his feet and left Lystra and went on. But that's an example of the pigs. Here he is trying to give them pearls, and they wanted something else. And so they turned and tore him, or stoned him, left him for dead. And so there's two examples of how that works. Anyway, to sum up, Jesus says, don't condemn other people. That's the kind of judgment not to do. Don't condemn other people. Don't be so condemnatory, so quick to condemn people for their actions. And treat others like you would want God to treat you. That's another reason not to condemn, because you don't want God condemning you. Treat others like you would want God to treat you. And the next point, fix yourself before trying to fix other folks. And it's just like the stewardess says, if you see the mask come down, the oxygen mask, put yours on and then try to help other folks. It's that kind of thing. Unless you're healthy spiritually, you can't really help other folks, and you got no business trying to get the speck out of their eye when you got beams in yours. Anyway, the last thing, don't waste time on those who prove themselves to be unworthy. Now, like I said, they have to prove themselves to be unworthy, and Jesus gives us, it's okay. In fact, I'm telling you, don't waste your time on these kind of folks. And then I wanted to throw in there this, don't be unworthy. Not only don't share the gospel with people that are unworthy, but don't be unworthy yourself, because we all have a choice. we have a choice of how to live our lives. What we need to do or should do is pattern our life after Jesus. Jesus did it right. He had the right answers. He's showing us the way. And so everything that Jesus says is the way he lived his life. And that's why we're looking at Jesus's life, looking at these the Sermon on the Mount and the parables that we'll be seeing soon, is to show us the way. And so we need to think about patterning our life after Jesus's life, because that's how we can be happy. That's how we can be judged the way we want to be judged, all these things. So I just want to encourage everyone here to think about, learn about, study about Jesus, and pattern your life after him. We're going to sing this song, Jesus Will Give You Rest. And that's exactly what he will do. So as we sing this song, think about that. And what I would like you to take home with you is pattern your life after Jesus. Let's sing. Let's stand and sing.